I've always had an anti-authority streak. I grew up in a small town in Texas, and I went to high school in the 90s, and I gave my teachers hell. I listened to alternative music, I grew my hair out and painted my fingernails. But I also really wanted to belong, to be part of something bigger than myself. And one of the things I found that was bigger than me was the church. And I was all in. I was in a Christian band. In college, I decided I needed to get rebaptized to make sure that my faith was my own, that I had made my own decision. I was all in. And one of the threads running through both of these truths about me is that I'm an idealist. I don't just believe the world could be better, I believe the world should be better. There's cracks in institutions that are so obvious, but I believed that if we tried a little harder, we could embody the goodness and kindness and radical values of Jesus. These unrealistic expectations of myself and the church and the world around me couldn't really last. There were cracks that showed up all along the way. But as Leonard Cohen said, those cracks are how the light gets in. When I was still a young, eager, probably judgmental evangelical, I was an exchange student in Denmark for a year. And my host mother took us to this beautiful island one time, and as we were walking, I commented that Danes don't really go to church the way we do in the U.S. And she turned to me and said, "Don't assume that we don't have faith just because it doesn't look like yours." The cracks in my worldview were starting to grow. After college, I worked in a couple of different churches, both of which were somewhat traumatic experiences. And the experience that continues to haunt me was when my best friend from college, best man at my wedding, was dying of cancer at 24 years old. I was working in the church office, and his parents called me and said he wasn't doing very well and that I should come see him before he passed away. So I jumped in the car immediately and headed to San Antonio. And on the way, I got a call from my pastor saying, I really needed to be at this church council meeting that night and that it wouldn't look good if I didn't show up. I was wrecked by being put in that position. But I'll always be grateful that I chose the sacredness of that moment over a church council meeting. When I left that church, I could have done anything else. I remember thinking, I could walk away. I could do something different. And yet I decided to go to seminary. What can I say? I love theology, I really do, so it does make sense. And during that time in seminary, we went to this small Baptist church where one of my closest friends in seminary was the pastor. Her last year of seminary, she invited me to lunch and said she had something to tell me. And as she sat nervously across the table from me, she said, "Don't worry, Lucas, I'm not gay." And then proceeded to come out to me as transgender. Our seminary affirmed women in ministry, at least in theory, but it was nowhere near affirming LGBTQ people. And so her coming out to me was such a huge gift and something I'll always be grateful for in the midst of a place where those cracks were often so prominent. During our time in seminary, we also fell in love with this weird community outside of Waco called World Hunger Relief. And we decided to sell our house, pack up our 2 small children, and move to this commune of Christian hippies living in community and learning sustainable agriculture. I mean, talk about a group of idealists. This was perfect for me. And while living at the farm, we also started attending this intentional Christian community. More idealists, just bring them on. And we really felt like in that community, we were able to live out our values and our faith with the people around us. We were a diverse community. It was bilingual. And of course, there were conflicts, but we learned about nonviolent communication and conflict resolution, and the relationships grew deeper because of that work. I thought we would be part of that community for the rest of our lives. And then in the summer of 2020, my middle child came out to us as transgender. We didn't hesitate to encourage him to share this news with the church over Zoom, of course. This was 2020, after all. And some of you may be aware, over the last several years, it hasn't been a particularly great time to be transgender or the parent of a transgender kid, especially in Texas. A little over a year after coming out to us and the church, a member of the community asked to have a conversation with me about our family and about having a transgender kid. I nervously and anxiously approached their porch, and we sat socially distanced, of course. And that conversation didn't go the way that so many other conversations had gone in that community. There wasn't the same willingness to set aside personal agendas and opinions to try and understand the other. There wasn't a recognition that we didn't have the same stakes in this conversation. And I left feeling uneasy and unsettled. The distance that we kept on the porch for our safety was a sign of the distance that was growing between our family and our community. And we made the painful decision to leave. We had to let go. And the dream of a community where we could be and do better died for us. After losing that community, and while still waiting and wondering if or when CPS might show up at our door, we were desperate for safety and security, a place that would affirm and welcome us just as we are. We visited this very building where I'm standing now, knowing that University Baptist Church in Waco, Texas, had made the decision to be fully welcoming and affirming to LGBTQ people. I remember the first Sunday, the youth pastor introduced himself with his pronouns and asked what our pronouns were. He mentioned they were creating a gender-neutral bathroom so that everybody could feel more safe and welcome. This was a place that had prepared for families like mine. And we felt like we could belong and breathe a little easier. And then, in the fall of 2022, bills began to be filed in the next Texas legislative session, and when I saw them, I thought, oh, fuck. This is not going to get better. And we made the painful decision, again, to figure out how to leave the only state that had ever been our home, the state where our families were, and the state where our community that we had built over 14 years was. I've always dreamed of a better world that's on its way, and that I could be a part of it if I just found the right community, the right church, the right job, the next thing. And when we moved to Bolivia in 2018, I remember thinking, as I had with every major transition in my life, that this was the opportunity for me to reinvent myself to be the person that I always wanted to be. Does it sound familiar to anyone else? And I realized one day that the problem with that was that I had brought myself with me. You know what they say, wherever you go, there you are? I think that I can share these painful stories and memories because along the way, I learned that leaning into the pain and learning from it was the only way to grow and to move past it. I'm continuing to do that work because life continues to bring pain through the cracks in institutions and individuals. But I know that Leonard Cohen was right, that those cracks are how the light gets in, because I also learned that joy is resistance to the darkness and the pain that haunts us. You see, in the midst of the stress and anxiety of parenting a transgender kid in Texas, I also saw the tears of joy in my kid's eyes when he learned he would be starting testosterone. And we celebrated with our queer chosen family at Waco Pride events. And that joy is what got us through. But the only time that we have to experience and lean into that joy is this present moment. Because the other thing that I learned is that the future is not real. My idealism always leaves me waiting, scanning the horizon for something better to come. The future is an act of the imagination. What an incredible act. It's great to imagine a better world, but it's not a great place for us to put our hope. Because the only way and the only time that we have to embody the better world we want is this present fleeting moment. The only way that that better world will ever arrive is if we live it out in the only moment that we have, right now. I still have a healthy skepticism of authority, but I realize that a life that's just anti is not a full life. The cracks will continue to appear along the way. But if we're willing to look at the light that they let in, we can see ourselves more clearly for who we are. And we can see the divine in ourselves and in others. My hope is that seeing by those cracks and the light they let in, we can live moment by moment as if the world that we want is already here. Thank you.